or if not, we could just have this conversation one-on-one if necessary. I mean, if you don't mind.
I think we were going to have it one-on-one. Let me just check. Okay, it seems like our staff is watching the stream, so we should be good.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right. Okay. Wow, what an honor to have you here today. Let me just put you on screen as well so we can. All right, there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, the regulator, the trust buster herself, FTC Commissioner Lina Khan, is in the building. This is spectacular. Thank you so much for coming on. And it is a joy to have you here. It is actually a momentous time to have you here as well, as breaking news just came out approximately half an hour ago that a judge has blocked Kroger's $24.6 billion merger with Albertsons, where the judge sided with the FTC, finding that the deal would reduce competition for U.S. grocery shoppers. Not sure if you want to speak on that at all. I don't know. I mean, it is breaking, but thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here with you. And yeah, I was just literally before I jumped on this reading the opinion that we just got from this judge in Oregon. This was the largest proposed supermarket merger in U.S. history. It's still in litigation, so limited what I can say, but this is a big win for the FTC.
Hell yeah. So you are, I think, one of the unsung heroes who is criminally underrated in the Biden administration and did not, in my opinion, get the worthy praise that you and your team deserve. Having said that, I wanted to talk to you about a lot of the the issues that you've tackled. But before we get to that, if you don't mind, is it possible for you to describe maybe what you do and what the concept of trusts are, or monopolies are, and how they come about in America?
Yeah, happy to. So I serve as chair of the Federal Trade Commission. This is a federal agency that was created 110 years ago. We actually just celebrated our 110th birthday. And the agency was created basically against the backdrop of the robber barons, right? The industrial trusts. So think like the meat trust, the steel trust, the oil trust. And basically what had happened was we'd had the Industrial Revolution, all of these great technological advances, these new technologies, but simultaneously a lot of concentration in the hands of a relatively few number of individuals and firms. At that time, the way that these monopolies were organized as businesses were kind of trusts, hence antitrust, hence trust busting. But the basic idea was really one that goes back to all the way to the founding, which was if what we care about is Americans being free and having real liberty and not having to worry about the arbitrary exercise of power, you need to have safeguards against the state. And our Constitution does that in terms of checks and balances. But you also need to have safeguards against tyrants of trade, as they were called, as private monopolies, because you need to safeguard against concentration of private power as well, because the way people experience freedom in their day-to-day lives is less through interacting on an ongoing daily basis with their government representative, but is through all of these commercial interactions and transactions and economic relationships. And so if you allow bullying and coercion to be okay in our economic realm, that's really going to undermine people's experience of freedom and liberty, right? And so the principles of antitrust and anti-monopoly are actually foundational to our country as a democracy. So that's kind of the original vision. Our agency is small. We're like 1,300 people, but we have oversight across the entire economy. We have a fantastic team. Under this administration, we've really been trying to reinvigorate how the agency enforces the law, uses its tools, and really turn the page on a approach since the Reagan years that had assumed that kind of big is always better and that somehow monopolies are going to deliver lower prices and be better for us. And I think we're just living with reams of reality that contradict that. And so we need to update how we enforce the law too.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like this is directly against the normal understanding of trust, both universally in other, OECD nations, but also specifically in America, throughout American history. The notion that I think the American conceptualization of monopolies and whether they are worthy of scrutiny or whether they're worthy of being busted, right, is entirely dependent on the consumer impact, right? I feel like this is different than just fundamentally how monopoly or oligopolies occur. That as long as the prices are low, as long as the prices are kept low, or at least if they like consistently increase but only marginally year over year, that these monopolies should not be touched and are not worthy of any scrutiny whatsoever. Would you say that that is different than the attitude demonstrated by other countries?
I mean, you know, the United States is kind of a leader in antitrust and anti-monopoly, and a lot of other countries have kind of adopted their laws, you know, in more recent decades. And the U.S. has actually had an important role in influencing how other countries have done things. And it was really interesting when I came into this role and started interacting more with international enforcers. They were kind of taken aback because for decades now, U.S. enforcers had kind of been chiding other countries and saying, hey, you got to be nicer to your monopolies. And, you know, under this administration, we were like, no, we're going to enforce the law. We need to, you know, be really assertive. We need to protect the public from this type of law breaking. And you're right that there are different ways that monopolies can illegally abuse their power, right? They can hike prices, they can depress wages, they can squash out entrepreneurs and new businesses. And I think what's been really perverse is that even if you say, okay, what the philosophy of the last 40 years was we're only going to address law violations by monopolies that they're raising prices, that we've actually seen higher prices in a whole set of areas. And so that approach on its own terms seems to have failed in ways that created kind of the opening to come in and say, hey, we're going to, you know, take a fresh look and reinvigorate things.
Yeah. Yeah, because the obvious elimination of competition is if you want to be the domineering force in a market, then inevitably when there's no more competition remaining, you get to set the prices, and you can slowly but surely, depending on how much you want to improve your profit margins, increase the prices, or at the very least tackle certain other aspects of the productive forces, i.e. labor. And consistently make labor conditions worse and worse, or never really keep with never increase wages in a meaningful way. And I think it harms workers, but it also ultimately inevitably harms the consumers as well. So obviously, I on a platform that's owned by Amazon, but I have to ask you, as someone who has been very critical of Jeff Bezos' practices and Amazon in general, so you wrote a formative work at, I believe, Yale Law School that specifically tackled Amazon as a monopoly. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what that journey was that got you become the commissioner of the FTC at such a young age.
Yeah, so I had a bit of a funny backdoor way into all of this work, which was I actually originally wanted to be a journalist and a reporter. I graduated during the financial crisis, where jobs generally were.
You're doing so much more important work, I think.
But ended up kind of landing with a think tank that had a little bit more of a journalism bent to it. But my job was really to do research to understand had different industries and markets evolved over decades. And so my job was to document market structure, which can sound kind of technical. But basically, I was kind of doing deep dives into areas like agriculture, like book publishing, like airlines, like rental cars, like all sorts of commodity markets. And across the board, and somewhat of an underappreciated trend in our economy, has been one of systemic consolidation. So where decades ago in a particular market, you had dozens and dozens of competitors, today, in part through mergers and acquisitions, you've gone from dozens to just a hand. And sometimes this degree of consolidation can kind of be masked from people, because you can go to the grocery store and see dozens of brands, be it in laundry detergent or diapers or what have you. But actually, those dozens of brands are still only controlled by a handful of companies, right? And so there can be this illusion of choice, and that consolidation and centralization of power was something that was really fascinating to me, especially since we had these laws on the books that were supposed to be anti-monopoly, But it seemed that some of these laws were instead now facilitating that very consolidation, monopolization. So I just became really fascinated in like, how did this happen? A lot of my job at that point also had involved just talking to regular people. So I spent a lot of time understanding how the chicken farming industry worked, where you basically have, millions of consumers on one side, thousands of farmers on the other, and they're actually just connected by a handful of these giant chicken processors. And so what that means practically is that if you're a chicken farmer in America, your entire livelihood can be dependent on the whims of a single company. Talking to these chicken farmers, you sensed a real sense of fear, honestly, about not wanting to get on the wrong side of this firm, about waking up one day and getting handed the sickly chicks instead of the healthy ones. And it was just an exercise of arbitrary power that our nation and our values are supposed to be against. And fast forward, I decided to go to law school, ended up writing this paper that was in part informed by the conversations I had with investors and the small businesses that were selling on Amazon, and ended up writing a piece around a governing framework of antitrust. I thought at that time was not adequate for capturing the reality of how digital platforms in particular could amass and exercise monopoly.
One of the predatory practices of Amazon that's like pretty obvious for people is routinely trying to purchase using the algorithm that they have inside of their sales structure to figure out like what products are actually working really well, and then as far as I understand, either trying to buy out these companies in its entirety, or if they don't play ball, if they want to retain ownership over their product, like create an alternative product, pushing I believe it was a diaper, right? Like there's a diaper company, there's like a story around a diaper company that's like very famous, creating a Amazon basic version of that same product, pushing down within its own search function the competitive product, and also underpricing the new competitive product that they've made in an effort to basically destroy this smaller producer, with the hopes of either down the line purchasing them for pennies on the dollar, or just completely crippling them and bankrupt them.